On behalf of Jane's children, Randall and Kevin Clark, I welcome you to a celebration of her life that she largely planned. I don't know what the other speakers are planning to say, but I suspect we'll hear a running through one. We'll start with the mayor of our city beautiful, Buddy Dial.
Okay, I vote for open bar at every memorial service. I think that's a pretty good idea. And as you get older, you go to more memorial services than you do weddings and things like that, engagement parties. So I met Jane Healy. I remember the exact time. Most of the time, you can't remember exactly when you met somebody for the very first time. You feel like you always know. But it was my editorial endorsement interview when I was running for the state senate, and I interviewed with her and David Porter, and they gave me a very nice editorial endorsement, which gave me some credibility, since at that point I had about 2% name recognition or something like that, and went on to win that campaign, so I thank you for that. And I also read a nice article about her saying that the first thing that would be in her obituary would be that she was a Pulitzer Prize winning writer, journalist, and I thought it would be how great her Mardi Gras parties because that's what I remember best of. All right, I'm very honored to have a resolution that I would like to read in full honor. Whereas Ms. J.D. Healy devoted more than 4 decades to journalism at the Orlando Sentinel, rising from Metro reporter to vice president and becoming the recipient of the newspaper's first Pulitzer Prize for editorial writing. And whereas Jane championed responsible growth, environmental stewardship, government accountability, helping preserve Central Florida's natural resources and shape the region's future. An engaged civic leader advocating for investments that enhance arts, culture, and quality of life throughout Central Florida. And whereas Jane's vision, advocacy, and leadership helped shape the city of Orlando and inspired generations of journalists, public servants, and engaged citizens through her legacy of integrity, courage, and service. And whereas Jane's remarkable professional achievements who matched her devotion to her family, friends, colleagues, and community, leaving a lasting legacy will continue to inspire Orlando and beyond. Now, therefore, I, Buddy Dyer, Mayor of the City of Orlando, on behalf of the residents of the City of Orlando, extend our deepest sympathy to the family, friends, and all who were impacted by Ms. Jane E. Healy, and declare Monday, June 15, 2026, as a citywide day and mourning to honor the memory of this outstanding servant leader.
All right, our next elected bigwig, the mayor of Orange County, Jerry Dillons.
I'm really honored to be here today. Oftentimes, Mayor Dyer and I appear on the same dais and have an opportunity to speak and present resolutions. I have to listen very carefully to what he's going to say to make sure I don't have to repeat what he's going to say. And I won't do that tonight because I have some other things that I want to talk about, Jane, about. I found out something today that I hadn't heard, and Jane and I share something in common. We're both twins, Jane and Monica, Jerry and Terry. But Monica, if either one of y'all have twins, I have twin sons, Antoine and Antonio. And my father had a twin also. He had a twin sister, so we had 3 generations of growth. But I'm not here really tonight to talk about that. But I had an opportunity to meet servant leadership roles that she had held here within our county was she was co-chair of our Tourist Development Task Force, that a group of volunteer citizens who I empowered just a couple of years ago to take a look at the tourist development tax revenues, and if we had any surplus, if you will, from those revenues, how would we spend those dollars? What would be the priorities for our community? And I wanted to find a couple of co-chairs who would be their authentic selves, who would come forward with what they believe was right, without the heavy-handed political influence, if you will. And how many of you thought that Jane would be up to the bill there, to not be pulled around and she would mess her peace? Well, she did that. And so, in a few minutes, I'm going to talk about the next co-chairs of the task force in a moment and see if the character of those individuals kind of follow the trend that we have established. But I do have a resolution here. And I'm not going to repeat what Mayor Dyer said, but what I am going to say is that Jane Healy rose from Metro reporter to editorial writer, editorial page editor, managing editor, vice president, and one of the most respected voices in Florida journalism. And whereas through her landmark editorial series, Florida's Shame, about runaway growth in Central Florida, she received the Pulitzer Prize for editorial writing, the first Pulitzer Prize awarded to the Orlando Sentinel. Whereas Jane Healy is also recognized as the state's top journalist with the Paul Hamzell Award for Distinguished Achievement in Florida Journalism. And whereas throughout her distinguished career, Jane remained deeply committed to the advancement of journalism education, serving as a member and chair of the University of Maryland Philip Merrill College of Journalism Board of Visitors, and was honored as a distinguished alumni in 2003 and inducted into the university's Hall of Fame in 2022. Whereas her fearless advocacy and commitment to public interest helped preserve Central Florida's natural resources in Orange and Seminole counties. Whereas Jane Healy continued to serve the community as the co-chair of Orange County's 2023 Tourist Development Tax Citizen Advisory Task Force, where she successfully advocated for increased investment in the arts and cultural programs that continue to benefit the community. And whereas Jane Healy was a trailblazer in journalism and embodied the highest ideals of journalism, public service, and personal integrity, leaving an enduring legacy throughout Central Florida and beyond. This woman, devoted mother, sister, friend, professional. Today, I want you to know that be it resolved by the Orange County Board of County Commissioners, Section 1 of this memorial resolution recognizes Jane's extraordinary accomplishments and her dedication and commitment to public service. This resolution is presented to the family of Jane Healy as a testimonial of the esteem in which she was held by the Orange County Board of County Commissioners and the residents of Orange County. Done in order this 15th day of June 2026, signed and yours truly. And so in honor of Jane Healy, the Orange County Tourist Development Task Force will be reconstituted here very soon. And we have two individuals I think who will lead in a similar way as Jane Healy. Unbossed and unbossed. One of them is here tonight. The very first Orange County Bank, Linda Chapin, will co-chair. It's breaking news. Scott Maxwell. And the second co-chair will be Eddie Moretti, who has been working with Lift Orlando to bring about some significant change in West Orlando. These two individuals will be chairing guilt in our community. So, to the entire family of Jane Hughes, we don't miss her, Mr. But God bless you. God bless Orange County for having a tightness like Jane Hughes. Thank you so much.
Now, the biggest wig of them all, John for the people Morgan.
Saying goodbye to Jane was the most unusual thing I've ever done. She called me last year to talk about finding Jim. Told me that Jim was going to be buried in the spring. And we talked about that. And then she said, I'm sorry for my children because it looks like I'm going to be buried in the spring too. I'm like, what in the world does that mean? And then she told me about her illness. And it was just surreal and so matter of fact. And so this year she called me and said, I also was one of her Mardi Gras friends. And she called me and said, why don't you come over and let's have one last drink? So I drove to her house, coming down, called on the phone. She said, I'll be out front. I don't look like I'm dying. I pulled up, she was out front. She didn't look like she was dying. And then we sat down, as we had many times at lunches throughout the years, and she started telling me about her illness, about the mother had the same illness, and we just talked and talked and talked and talked. We talked about Rusty Carroll, his outrageous legal bills. She had to wrestle him with. We talked about all the old times. I said, Jane, are you good with God? Are you ready for that? She said, I'm not worried about that. I've led a good life. Raised good kids, love my grandkids. And we talked about the clawback from the Sentinel when she had the buyout and the clawback. And she said, you know, I went ahead and settled that case with the Sentinel. I said, okay. She said, because I like to be in control. And I said, over my Cosmo, no shit. We talked for about 3 hours, and then it was time to go. And I got up and walked out, and I felt like I should be in some kind of Netflix movie where the two characters were just sitting at this little table talking about old times. And then I said goodbye. We walked out to the stoop, and she gave me a hug. And I said, well, Jay, I guess this is hello. When I came in, and this is goodbye. And it was. And then she wrote me that night. She said I could have talked for hours and hours. It was like old times. So I don't go to many things anymore, but there are some people you just have to show up for. And Jane Healy was one of them. When I got here today, I was looking at the food, and somebody at the food buffet said, Jane picked out everything, planned everything for this event. And I said, oh shit. Not only was Jane Healy force of nature and in control in life, as it turns out, Jane Healy was also in control in death. We are going to miss this wonderful woman. Thank you.
All right, let me explain how this is going to go. All the speakers up here have volunteered. They've been capped to a 2-minute limit. We'll see who follows the instructions. son, Kevin, her twin sister, Monica, and me. And that's because Jane and I wrote the rules. She wanted everyone limited to 2 minutes. So next up is somebody who's not limited. Jane's twin sister, Monica Healy.
Okay, since I'm her twin sister, I have seniority over everybody here. I was in the room with Jane, I was her twin sister, and I was the first one out. The birth certificate said, Monica baby A, Jane baby B. Full disclosure, Jane, just 5 years later, the twins were thieves. We were 5-year-old criminals. Our mother had a strict rule, no candy. Jane was a candy addict. One day, we snuck out of our house, walked down to Doc's drugstore, which was about half a mile from our house in Cherry Chase, Maryland, and started stealing candy. We were not very good criminals. We got caught. The manager called our parents who weren't happy. I told them it was Jane's idea. You see, Jane was a rule breaker from a very young age. And she was always pushing the envelope, doggedly fighting for causes she believed in, candy and the environment. As we all know, Jane had a stellar career in the world, talking about the people who knew her or probably thought she got straight A's. She did not. C's and B's. But it was her ability in sports that gave us the first clue that she was destined to be at the top of her field in any career. The families in the second neighborhood, that was Friendship Heights, and mostly boys. So we did what boys did. We played baseball. We were just 8 years old. We were always the last one picked for the team because we were girls. By the time we got to the 6th grade at Glen Sacrament School, we were ready for the big leagues. They had a girls softball team for 6th graders, the junior varsity, and for 7th and 8th graders, the varsity. The twins had the chutzpah to try out for the varsity. Jane made it. I did not. A 6th grader had never made the team. But Jane declined. Why? She said she wanted to be with me. But years later, in a moment of candor, she fessed up. She said she realized that if she was on the junior varsity, she couldn't stand out. If she was on the junior varsity, she couldn't tell. But the varsity, she couldn't. And she was right. She was an ace pitcher in between all the other teams. I suspect early on my father, who was a journalist himself, had an inkling that Jane was going to follow in his footsteps. Recently, I found a letter he wrote to her brother when we were kids. He talked about how curious Jane was. She was always asking questions, and she was not intimidated easily. But one evening, when we were about 14, Robert F. Kennedy, who was the then Attorney General under LBJ, came to my parents' house for a party. My father was a White House reporter, so he knew the Kennedys well. About half an hour into the party, Jane cornered him and boldly asked, "Are you going to run for the president?" He gave her a flat no. Probably not the last time a politician told her less than the whole truth, and an appropriate beginning to a long and wonderful career. When Jane first told me that she was diagnosed with blood cancer, she said she was okay with that. She never wanted us to feel sorry for her, to worry. She put up a brave face and protected us all. When I heard the news, I broke down in tears. Well, Jane, if you're looking down from above, it's not okay with me. Selfishly, I did not want to survive you. Baby B, too much pain. Left a big hole in my heart.
I'm going to talk about Jane's life and her death. Jane and I were close friends for most of our adult lives. We met when both of us, in our mid-20s, were assigned to the Sentinel's Winter Park Bureau, covering the municipalities of Winter Park, Maitland, and Eatonville. Can you believe there was a Winter Park Bureau? In those heady days of our careers, and before we each had children, we talked about little else than our work. I eventually moved to Tallahassee, but Jane and I always stayed in close touch about our careers, our children, about life. She was exceptionally disciplined in her daily habits. She started each and every day with a can of cold Diet Coke. She exercised, she read newspapers, went to work until her retirement in 2008, would relax every evening with cold Heineken, and watch TV with complex plots and characters for live sporting events. Before she retired, Jane thoroughly read the Sentinel every day while pedaling a stationary bike in her bedroom. After she retired, she took up walking around the neighborhood, 4 to 5 miles a day. She wore black, heavy-duty flip-flops and often walked with both hands on her hips and her fingers pointing backward. Former Sentinel veteran Lynn Osgood, wife of the late Alex Beasley, also a Sentinel veteran, remembered in a note, "We used to see her on her regular strolls. Alex always worried about her feet. He once told her she needed to switch out the sandals for better shoes. Jane assured him her feet were supported, and then told him gently," Liz said. Lynn said that he wasn't her father, so he didn't need to worry. I could just hear her. Jane walked every day until a couple of months before she died. The Diet Coke and newspapers remained a crucial part of her daily life until the end. She read in precisely this order: the Sentinel, the New York Times, and the Wall Street Journal. 3 days before she died, too fatigued and weak to hold the newspaper and read, she asked me to read aloud to her a front-page story about a new candidate in the race for Orlando mayor. After reading it to her, she provided a cogent analysis of the race and political landscape, and chased it with a Diet Coke. Bob and I live 1 block north of Jane's house. During the last couple of months of her life, I would stroll over for regular visits. Bob would mix a couple of cosmopolitan cocktails, one of her favorites, and I'd deliver them to her in mason jars. She imbibed until a week before she died. By the way, cosmopolitans are a featured drink at the bar. If you haven't had one, you might belly up and have one in memory of Jane. During our visits, Jane talked and I listened. I'd go home and take notes of things she said for just this occasion, because she had assigned me the task of planning her celebration nearly a year before she died. When I think of Jane, I think of certitude. She was certain about most things. That doesn't mean she was right, but she thought she was. She told me one morning, "I've had a terrific life. It has exceeded all of my expectations, professionally and personally." She said she had no regrets, not one. Not many of us can say that. She accepted that life and people aren't perfect, yet her life was fabulous. Her house was more than a home and more than her castle. It was her palace, where she cherished every nook and cranny. She'd invite me over to admire a new throw pillow that I would have described as a basic square lavender pillow. But in Jane's eyes, it was an object of art. She'd have me view it from different angles, up close and from afar. Didn't it stand out? Didn't it pull the room together? Didn't it provide a focal point? Over and over. It was a throw pillow. Jane relished showing off and sharing her home and wanted people to feel comfortable there. During our annual Mardi Gras parties, throngs of guests crowded her kitchen, family room, and back porch. She never minded the spilled drinks, not even the red wine. They were proof of a good time. Jane's greatest pride and joy was her family. 4 siblings. She was preceded in death by her oldest sister, Julie. 2 children, 4 grandchildren, and by the way, there's a 5th on the way. Kevin and Emily are expecting another son in November, and Jane knew before she died. She also has 2 great-grandchildren. Randall, the older son, had a special bond with his mother. They each could aggravate the pee out of each other, but they always had each other's backs, no matter what. Jane considered Randall her white knight. After Hurricane Katrina devastated New Orleans, she recounted the horrifying news story of people dying in Charity Hospital as it filled with water. She told me quite confidently and with certitude, I'd never have to worry about that. Randall would have found a way to get me out. And Randall, you surely would have. Randall, you couldn't have had a greater protector, defender, or champion. And Kevin, your mom burst her buttons week in and week out with your journalistic successes, which have come in rapid succession. She sent out weekly alerts so none of us would miss any of your TV appearances. That apple didn't fall far from the tree, did it? She couldn't have been prouder. Well done, Kevin. Beyond her 2 children, the highlight of Jane's life was her career. One day, while waxing philosophically, she told me, I can't believe I got paid to do my job. She said, the pinnacle of success is loving what you do so much, you do it for free. I got paid a lot to do what I loved. Jane loved, loved, loved. Every day she reported for work at the Orlando Sentinel. Her work brought her enormous satisfaction and pride. She learned about 6 years ago that she would die of the same disease that claimed her mother's life, MDS. It's a bone marrow disease that depletes the hemoglobin that carries oxygen to the entire body, and platelets that cause blood clots so we don't bleed to death. She told few people outside of her family because she didn't view herself as sick, and she didn't want others to either. Until the day she died, she did not look sick. She took delight in how surprised people would be when they learned of what she called her demise. And I'm certain she's right. I'm certain many of you were surprised. Nobody appreciated a scandal more than Jane. O.J. Simpson, Clinton Lewinsky, Casey Anthony. But nothing brought her greater interest or pleasure at the end of her life than Jeffrey Epstein. She relished every news story in the Wall Street Journal and the New York Times. She called the Epstein stories both interesting and important, the two qualities, she said, that distinguish great news stories. Jane was the model of the Serenity Prayer and how she lived and how she died. She would research the hell out of problems, consider the options, change what she could, and accept what she could not change with grace and courage. She had an uncanny ability to make peace with her decisions and not stew, wring her hands, second guess, or look back. It was certitude. Jane chose to live her remaining days in her beloved home, sitting on the couch in the family room, sipping Diet Coke, reading newspapers, and watching TV. No bucket list. She said she'd been everywhere she wanted to go and done all she wanted to do. She feared going to the hospital more than dying, of getting caught up in the medical industrial complex that likely would work to prolong her life when all she wanted was to not fight death, but accept it with dignity and calm. She and I discussed her death openly, candidly, and comfortably. She said she got tired of people asking her if she was afraid of dying. She said, "We're all going to die. What's there to be afraid of? I'm not afraid of dying, only getting there," she said, and made her nervous. She wanted to die naturally, without interventions, and she did. On the day before Jane died, she asked me that morning in a moment of wakefulness if the end was near. I assured her it was. "Good," she replied. That night, I sat on the edge of her bed, stroking her arm, and told her I was going to squirt some medicine under her tongue. She opened her eyes, took a few moments to focus, and said, "I'm alive." It was half declaration and half disbelief. I burst out laughing and laughed for quite a while. Those were her last words. 13 hours later, I stood by her, wished her Godspeed, and I physically felt, I really did, I felt her life force through the body. Jane died with clarity, courage, and certitude. There was no pain, nor gasping for air. She never once expressed regret, anger, fear, or anxiety. Only pride in her work, love for her family, and delight in the Epstein files. Just like great stories, Jane was both interesting and important. May her memory be a blessing. Now, Jane's youngest sister, Kathleen Healy.
Thank you, Judy. That was beautiful. Thank you, Monica, and everybody else who has spoken. It's been really, really beautiful. I had to figure out how to deal with, I saw Jane, the last time I saw her was a month before she died. We were down here for the celebration of life for her ex-husband, Jim. And, yeah, so I had to figure it out. We knew she was dying. We knew it was going to be like 3 or 4 weeks, and figure out how to deal with it. I was texting her. But then I found something that just helped me to deal with this whole process of death. And that's what I'm going to do. short. It's written by Henry Van Dyke, and it's from a pamphlet called Going from My Sight, The Dying Experiments. I am standing upon the seashore. The ship at my side spreads her white sails to the morning breeze and starts for the blue ocean. She is an object of beauty and strength. I stand and watch her until at length she hangs up a speck of white cloud just where the sea and sky commingle with each other. And somebody on my side says, there, she is gone. Gone from my sight. I was wrong. She is just as large and vast and bold and spar as she was when she left my side. And she is just as able to bear her load of living prayer to her destiny court. Her diminished size is a meaning, not become. And just at the moment when someone at my side says, there, she is gone, there are other eyes watching her, coming, and other voices ready to take up the glad shout. Here she comes, and that is time.
And now it's my distinct pleasure to introduce you to Jane's mentor, who meant so much to her. The former Sentinel editor, who was editor for all 3 Pulitzer Prizes won by the Sentinel, John Yale from Baton Rouge.
Thank you, Judy. Thanks to Devin and Randall for following through on what Jane wanted, and also to Judy for really doing the detailed work and making it all come together. I do find it just a little bit ironic, though, that Jane would hold us to 2 minutes in our comments. So I've been in conversations with Jane where she get all fired up about something, and she could go on for more than 2 minutes with just one sentence. And sometimes she wouldn't even take a breath. But she's a great journalist by any measure. And she and I were both colleagues and friends for more than 45 years. When I first came to Orlando in 1979, gosh, that seems like a long time ago, I was given an assignment of putting together a team of political reporters. I was asked by Tim Squires to go out alter bureaus wherever it took and find some of the best, brightest, most savvy people I could find. Jane was one of those people, and she lived up to every bit of it. Not long after that, though, I was named after the editorial pages, and I brought Jane along with me. And I think somebody might say that that might have been the best decision I ever made. But in that time, the Sentinel was really coming of age, much like Orlando itself. But, we did win a Pulitzer. We come close a couple of times with shuttle coverage, and then Jane's earlier round of Florida Shane's editorials, but we had never won. But when we did, we felt like we had arrived. So she really helped define who we were, what we could do, and certainly got us great attention nationally. As noted here, James was seldom in doubt about anything. But what is important, I think, to me was that you could always trust James to tell you the truth, unvarnished truth. And she could depend on her in any job. But she also was willing to embrace change, which is really important considering what we had to go through in those years. Even on the editorial page, she brought original reporting into her editorials, which became a standard nationally for what defined a great editorial. She also was willing
So listen, make changes, rewrite, listen to how to those those. And you'd think that as certain as she was, as tough as she might resist those things or her evil or not somehow get in the way. But she did, and it made her a great intellectual runner. And when we needed somebody to keep the newsroom on track, as we got into new media, Jane was my choice again. And once again, she did a great job and Central benefited from it. And Jane was justifiably proud of her policy. She worked hard and she got a lot of attention with it. And some great things happened, particularly as she reminded me just recently of what Calvin River was basically saying. So her legacy will be much more than that, though, I think. Because Jane made a difference. In Orlando today, Central Florida today, and certainly Seminole during her years, different because of Jane. I think that's a great legacy.
Next was supposed to be Charlotte Hall, who was an editor of the Sentinel from 2004 to 2010. But she's traveling, so she asked former Sentinel editor Mike Lafferty to read her remembrance. But he got sick. And he texted me this morning to say he was in Europe last week and gotten sick and was off to the doctors. So I'm filling in for Charlotte and Mike, reading Charlotte's remembrance. Jane and I worked side by side at the Sentinel, both reporting to publisher Kathy Waltz, an unusual female leadership trio in those days. While my office was only a few feet from Jane's, our daily paths rarely crossed. The whole point was to keep the Sentinel opinion pages Jane's responsibility, separate from news coverage, my responsibility. Yet we also became friends, and that friendship deepened after we retired several months apart. Then I could be as opinionated as I wanted, and Jane and I usually agreed, though not always. I had tremendous admiration for Jane as a journalist for her deep knowledge of Central Florida and the clarity and power of her writing. As a friend, for her love and care of her family, her civic spirit, her strong moral compass. Jane and I also were a part of a circle of retired Sentinel women and other Central Florida women leaders. We celebrated each other's birthdays with great fanfare, and once a year, Linda Chapin hosted us at her family's second home in Boca Grande. What sweet days those were. In more recent years, on my annual visits to Orlando, Jane and I would sit and talk for hours, sometimes on her porch, sometimes over lunch or happy hour. About a year and a half ago, Jane told me about her illness. She said there was no cure. I was stunned and moved by her honesty and courage. This January, she wasn't well enough for a visit, and we last talked by phone about 10 days before she died. Above all, Jane lived a life of service. I will always miss her, and I am deeply grateful for her friendship and the example she set for us all. All right, now the current editor of the Orlando Sentinel, Roger Simmons.
When I started the Sentinel in 1993, Jane was already the managing editor there, and I was just a wide-eyed young journalist, feeling very fortunate to be at the Orlando Sentinel at that time. And frankly, I was a little intimidated in that newsroom because you had such wonderful journalists such as John Hale and Jane, a real-life Pulitzer Prize winner, the first one I've ever seen in person. So it was a big deal for me. But my first few years at the Sentinel, I worked in sports. So I was over in another department, we worked at nights, and frankly, I was fine not to have any interaction with senior management, just wanted to keep my head down. But I remember the day that changed. At the Sentinel, we used to have these annual awards for our journalism in the newsroom. And these used to be really big, lavish events they would have at hotels out at Disney or some other places. And as years went on, we had to scale those back a little bit. And one year, and I'm not sure exactly who came up with this idea, decided that instead of having a traditional awards ceremony, we would have something in the newsroom called the Prize Patrol. Now, what this was is the senior editors would roll a cart around the newsroom. It had a big flashing blue light like you used to see in Kmart, and little bicycle horns. So they'd walk by, honk, 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 Prize Patrol, Prize Patrol, to get everybody's attention about what was going on. And this is all happening on deadline too, so curmudgeon reporters are kind of like, what's going on? But one day Jane was in charge of the Prize Patrol. And I look up and I see her pushing the cart around the room, honking the horn and everything, and she stops at this reporter's desk. And I wish I could remember exactly who it was. But she stops, the reporter looks up excitedly at her like, I'm getting an award, and Jane just looks at him and goes, psych, and then moves the cart and rolls it off to another reporter. I just laughed my ass off. But that really took away this demeanor that Jane had where I was intimidated by her, and I'm like, I want to get to know this person because that was funny as hell. And it really let me see that other side of her. And years later, when I became managing editor and then executive editor at the Sentinel, Jane was so kind in letting us talk, and I could ask her questions about the two positions, and just offering me encouragement and ideas and suggestions along the way, and I really appreciated that. And so I'm always going to remember that Prize Patrol moment because in the end, I was the one who was rewarded with the prize of getting to know Jane and getting to learn so much from her journalism. Thank you.
Next up, Orange County's first and only woman mayor. Linda Matters. Linda Shaker.
At the grocery store one day, a man came up to me and said, "You were one of those women." Absolutely true. Unlike most of you, I was not close to Jane during her working years, but I did have an excellent vantage point in the 90s to watch what she was doing and to admire her, which I did, her research, her writing, her influence. I once tried to change her mind about an issue that I cared about, and I learned something that day about her stubbornness. In fact, her editorials could change an outcome on the county commission in the 90s between 6 a.m. and noon on any given Tuesday. We became close friends when she retired with a group of women, as Charlotte noticed, that included Rita Ornstein and former Congresswoman Pat Schroeder. Those were good times, others. She and I, by then, were close enough so that she shared her terminal diagnosis with me a year or so ago. And from then on, she occasionally referred to the time that she might have left, always very matter-of-factly. 4 days before she died, when I was with her, she was reading the news and debating it, as she always did. Oddly, the next night I came across a quote from a favorite book of mine. If the ultimate proof of God is existence itself, which many claim to be the case, then a true state that you are still reading your books and singing your songs when the guards come for you at dawn. Jane gave us an example of how to live with skill and hard work and commitment. Jane also gave us an example of how to die with calm and courage and grace. We may or may not live up to those examples, but we celebrate tonight both of them. I will confess to one more exchange. When I'm given bad news, I often respond, Shakespeare comes to my mind right away. And when Judy let me know that Jane had died, I answered with some of the wonderful Flights of Angels quote. Whereupon Judy reminded me sternly that Jane was never sentimental, and I was reproved. But I did offer one more response. Well, you're right. But wouldn't that have given Jane one hell of a big surprise?
Now, Sentinel columnist Scott Maxwell.
Thank you, Judy. You know, a lot has been said tonight about Jane's passion for journalism and newspapers, and she was indeed a champion for thoughtful policy and watchdog journalism. But there was something else Jane was, and that was a pain in the ass. Kevin's laughing, right? You guys both know this is true. We love her. That's why we are all here. But sometimes talking to Jane was like talking to a brick wall. A brick wall would spit on you sometimes when she kept going really fast. I'm one of the few people, I think, in this room that was hired by Jane who still actually works at the newspaper. And that's probably because most everybody else in this room has the sense God gave a turnip and got out of newspapers back when it made sense. But Lord help me, I still care about some of the same things Jane did, and much like Jane, I also enjoy being a pain in the ass. I like needling people and calling out BS, and Jane did too, not just when she ran the newspaper, but long after she left. In fact, in recent years, Jane would sometimes send me lengthy emails and texts, not to ask how I was doing or check on my kids. I'm not sure she knew I had kids. She didn't care. She wanted to talk politics and policy. Now, she had a lighter side. We mentioned everybody liked her Mardi Gras parties and the way she loved her boys, but fiercely protective and proud of both. And you know, she loved her friendships. And for those of you who don't know, Bob and Judy were nothing short of a godsend for Jane in her final months. You couldn't ask for a better champion than Judy. But Jane was largely a serious person, especially when she knew time was short. And when Cindy and I were fortunate enough to spend another an hour and a half with her in a couple weeks before she passed for that last drink John Morgan described, she knew she was drowning, and she said as much. But she didn't want to talk about that. She wanted to talk about journalism and this community and fucking tourist taxes. Jane believed that journalism was a calling, a mission, and a responsibility, and that's why a few weeks ago when I learned that tourist taxes were actually going to be probably a key issue in the next county mayor's race, I sent her an email letting her know that she could rest easy knowing that some of her legacy work on that front had made a difference. I later learned that that email hit her inbox a few hours after she passed. But I know that she knew her work made a difference. If you didn't believe it, just ask her. And frankly, I think the world could use a few more pains in the asses when it comes to speaking truth to power. The best journalists aren't in this business to make friends. They care deeply about the communities they cover. They want to give voice to the voiceless. They want to not only comfort the afflicted, but afflict the comfortable. And Jane was fearless in that regard, all the way to the end. So here's to Jane, and to all the other pains in the asses in this room that she surrounded herself with, because she knew they all make the world a better place.
Our next speaker, Jim Backus, has many titles. Former this, former that, former this. They're all impressive. asked to be identified as the Distinguished Professor of Global Affairs at the University of Central Florida. Jim Backus.
Part of my deal with UCF is that I try wherever I am and whenever I can to help them with their branding, thus that choice. I'd like to talk briefly a little more about what it was that Jane cared about. Few communities, certainly not ours, can afford to lose a visionary voice such as that of Jane Healy. Our community here in Central Florida is far better than it would otherwise have been because she was here. From time to time we listened to her. It would be a much better place than it is now if we had listened to her a lot more. I knew Jane for 53 years. In 1973, when she came to the Sentinel, I was already there. Jane was 1 month older than I am. So we were counterparts, peers. And I remember the first thing she said to me when I introduced myself. She said, "I hear you're a bit of a hotshot around here." I set out to prove myself to Jane, and I think I did when she realized that I shared her aims. What were her aims publicly? In one sentence, I would say that she sought the fullness of human flourishing for everyone in a thriving and bountiful nature, natural environment. That's what she sought. At the time in Florida, we called it growth management. Globally, it's called sustainable development. That's what Jane spent her life working for. And I think the best thing we could do to honor her would be to keep working for those aims to which she devoted her service, because that's what it was indeed. It was a life of service. Now, the loftiest aims that Jane had were lofty indeed. Her expectations of herself and her expectations of others, including politicians she wrote about, who might have been friends, but were nevertheless politicians, were very high, and high they should be. Trying to end poverty or protect the environment may be hard to do. It may be a lofty aim. And some would say that the highest the aims for sustainable development cannot be achieved in one lifetime. But I think Jane would tell us, if she was still with us, that aims that can only be achieved within one's lifetime are aims that are not high enough. So I say let's remember Jane by emulating her in our devotion to a better life for all, in a bountiful natural world, and being as fearless and relentless and pugnacious as she was in trying to achieve it.
Next is Sandra Kies, who was a Sentinel op-ed page editor and assistant managing editor for news features back in the mid-'80s. She also lived in the bungalow right next to Jane's house. Sandra.
I've written this down because I'm picturing Jane standing behind with a stopwatch. I even reminded myself. Jane was my next door neighbor for 4 years and my friend for more than 40. So like most of you, I have a lot of memories swirling around in my head. And one that keeps swirling up to the top is of a day when Jane and I were driving up to her condo in St. Augustine.
I was so ready to be at the beach, I could almost hear the sound of the waves rolling up to the shore. But instead, I heard Jane's voice saying, "We need to make a detour. I just heard about this parcel of land," you see where this is going, right? That is really beautiful, but some developers are after it. It's not that far. We need to go look at it because I might want to write about it. Well, she did write about it, of course, and her writing had an impact because she had seen it that it would never have had if she had just heard about it. And then we did drive on and had a great relaxing time at the beach. That memory really sums up Jane for me. Always alert for examples of the journalistic issues that she cared so much about, but equally focused on her relationships with her friends and her family. Something that was rarely mentioned when people talk about Jane's Pulitzer is that she had 2 children under the age of 5 at the time she won it. And she nurtured Randall and Kevin with the same devotion, more even devotion, that she brought to her work as a journalist. I'm really grateful that during the final months of her illness, as we reminisced, I had a chance to tell Jane how much I appreciated her friendship, but also how much I admired the fact that her life and her work have literally made this world better. Something that all of us would like to say of ourselves, but that not all of us can. And I realized how crazy it was that I had never said those things to Jane until I knew that she was dying. Jane was better than I am in a lot of things, and I'm sure one of them is that she let the people she loved know how much they meant to her. I know she let me know how much you all meant to her. I could practically write all of your biographies, and I rarely see you. But I'm glad that your memories of her will leave no doubt of how she felt about you all. And I'm glad that we can all be here tonight to show how much we care about Jane.
Our next speaker isn't here. The peripatetic Jackie Hughes, Jane's good friend and traveling companion, is in Switzerland. But Jackie sent me a remembrance to read. Jackie was principal of Winter Park High School from 1988 to 2001, after which she went to the Orange County School District office as an associate superintendent. Jackie wrote, "My dear friend, Jane, oh, how I miss being with you all today to celebrate Jane. Jane was my wonderful friend for over 30 years. We met at a VIO, by invitation only, it's a dating service, function. We both were looking into the availability of suitable male species in our area. We chatted about education for her sons. The next week, Jane invited me to lunch at the Orlando Sentinel. I knew I was in tall cotton, a Mississippi phrase. From there, we took many walks together. I panted to keep up. Remember, Jane walked with her hands on her hips and flip-flops. And then had a Diet Coke on her back porch and chatted about the best news lately. The photos that hung on the hall wall commemorating significant events of hers and how our lives were going. How I enjoyed all of those chats. We went together to France for the Roland Garros tennis matches. There were several times at her beach condo in St. Augustine, holiday and other meals in her home, even invitations that included my nephew and his partner. Other events included meals from the grill with some of her family members. So many memories I have. Thank you, Jane, for inviting me to be your friend. I will always know the admiration and respect I have for you. Life won't be the same without you." I love you dearly. Now, 30-year veteran of the Sentinel, Lisa Chauncey.
Hello. So every year, Jane would come to our Christmas parties. And one year, probably more than 25 years ago, Jane was coming to our party with Ann Helmet and the late Sean Holden. And they get to our neighborhood and they get on our street, and there's the house with all the lights, cars are lined up. And they find a parking space and they are heading into the house. And Sean says, you know, Jane, I don't think this is Roger and Lisa's house. And Jane said, of course it's Roger and Lisa's house. Spoiler alert, it was not Roger and Lisa's house. But nevertheless, they made their way in and they're standing there and they realize that they don't know a single person, of course, because it wasn't our house. And then they look on the wall and there's a young couple, remember this was many years ago, with kids, but it wasn't me and it wasn't Roger and it wasn't our son Christian. At that point, Jane conceded that, yeah, this is the wrong house. So they made their way around the corner, they found our place, they came in and told everyone what happened, and we all just thought it was the funniest thing. And every year when Jane would come to our party after that, I would just think of that story and smile. And I would like Judy to know, I think I'm the only one who stayed under 2 minutes.
Next, Mike Griffin, who worked at the Sentinel for 24 years as a reporter and editor.
My deepest sympathies. And I gotta tell you, I had the best Jane Healy newsroom story of all time. It's a political scandal, sex, newsroom angst and tension, and cigars placed in inappropriate places. However, I only have 2 minutes. So you're gonna have to look for me or Roger Roy after this to get this story. I just want to say, everybody knows Jane the ball buster, okay? Let's be honest. If you work for Jane, she held you to the highest standard. It was the standard she held for herself. And she took no prisoners. But she didn't do it to stroke her ego. She certainly didn't do it to line her pocket. She did it for the purpose of good journalism and for the good of the community. And I will tell you proudly right now, there would not be a Dr. Phillips Performing Arts Center if it wasn't for Jane Healy's leadership of that institution. And that's something that's a legacy that will live forever. They should name the fucking place after. But there's another Jane that not enough people know. When I left the Sentinel, I was certain, and I know I disappointed Jane. And I had thought that disappointment had morphed into anger. And the weird part about it is Jane thought I was angry at her because of some, I don't even remember, it was some bullshit HR stuff. I don't even know what it was. And that we would talk and we were together from time to time, but we were never really close. And then at Lisa and Roger's Christmas party one year, Jane came up to me and said, hey, could we come outside for a minute? And Jane and I went out and we sat next to their pool. And Jane started off the conversation, was like, Mike, I just want to apologize to you. I know, you didn't get 2 weeks of vacation coming to you when you quit, but I didn't have anything to do with that. I was like, Jane, I have no freaking clue what you're talking about. I want to apologize to you because I feel like I let you down. And Jane said, no, man. Of course I was disappointed, but look at everything you've done. Look at everything we did together at the editorial board. That's stuff to be proud of. And Colby, my wife, walked out. She sat down next to us and said, I don't know what you two are talking about, but I'm sure it's shit I could not care least about. But I'm glad to see you two talking again. And Jane and I started having regular lunches. They were once a month, maybe every now and again. It was every couple of weeks. And it was what you would expect. It was politics, right? But then there were those moments where we would talk about what was happening in our lives. Our kids, how proud she was, and proud of the work we had done. And it was just that they were amazing lunches. And then Colby got sick. And the lunches were replaced with doctor's appointments, chemotherapies, and we drifted apart physically. But I will tell you, every now and again, a card would show up at our house for Colby. Hell, cards would show up at my office for me. And they weren't these maudlin, hey, you can do it, dig in there, get well soon. It was like, hey, I'm just thinking about you. A text would drop in. When Colby passed away, I looked at her text messages. There were half a dozen text messages from Jane. And when Colby entered hospice, I got a call from Jane. And we spent a half an hour on the phone. And typical Jane, the last 5 minutes was, yeah, I want to let you know I'm in hospice too. And she explained her illness, and she said, I don't want you to tell anybody. It was always the case when Jane had trouble in her life, Colby and I would reach out to her. And it was always kept secret, always kept secret. And the last thing I said to Jane Healy was, I love you. And the last thing Jane said to me was, I love you too. And damn it, that's the Jane Healy that I wish more people knew. Because that is the Jane Healy that I will always remember. Thank you, I appreciate it.
Jane worked with lots of new young reporters, but she had a particular fondness for those who came from her alma mater, the University of Maryland. Next up is a University of Maryland alum, Jason Garcia. He was a reporter for 16 years. He is now the publisher and reporter of Seeking Rents, the newsletter and the podcast. Jason.
So I think the thing I most admire about Jane as a journalist was her ability to process information in real time, all the homework she did, even when you didn't think she had, right? Like you thought she wasn't paying attention, she wasn't. And I learned about this very early. Like Judy said, I was brought to the Sentinel by Jane. She had come out to the University of Maryland, where I was a junior at the time. She was actually there, had nothing to do with the university, had some like hotshot sports writer who was a senior that she really wanted to hire. And so the school decided, hey, well, you're here, talk to a bunch of our juniors about an internship. So I got creative into a line with her, or a line to meet with her. So I had 15 minutes with her. And so we sat down, and it's one of these stupid interviews where it's like, she's like, why do you want to be a journalist? And I started talking about how much I love the newspapers and stupid stuff like cutting out like old newspapers and giving them to my parents when I was a kid. And the whole time though, she's kind of like looking around, not really paying attention. Every time someone would walk by the door, she'd kind of start and look up. And then eventually, that hotshot sports senior walked by, and I'm in the middle of an answer about, again, how passionate I am about journalism. She's like, just hold that thought for 1 second. She runs out to go talk to the guy. And that takes up the entire 15 minutes. She like walks back in, and she's like, okay, where were we? And I was like, I think I was explaining about how much I love journalism. And she was like, yeah, that's going to be great. We'll be in touch. And so, like, I walked out of there thinking, I remember talking to the advisor at the University of Maryland, who was like, how'd it go? And I was like, well, I don't know where I'm going to be this summer, but it sure is not going to be in Orlando, Florida. But find out later. I also spent a lot of time making my opinion known about her lack of judgments and the fact that she didn't know anything, and who cares what she thinks anyway. Get a call the very next day from her. It turns out she'd been paying attention to every single word I'd said. She even remembered the stupid story about cutting that blue newspaper stuff. And she ended up bringing me in. So obviously my opinion of her judgment. But I say all this is this was like a real focus for her, bringing in young journalists, nurturing young journalists. She brought in some of the most phenomenal journalists I have ever worked with. I've been doing this for 25 years now. I'm thinking of people like Beth Cassidy, people like Sean Musselman. None of us would have come to the Sentinel without Jane Healy. None of us would have turned into the journalists that we did become. Whether or not you're Scott Maxwell and you stayed at the Sentinel, or you're literally everybody else that left. Wherever you are, Jane's legacy lives on. And so we've talked a lot tonight about Deepak is a big legacy for her. Obviously, the Pulitzer and the way she helped elevate the Sentinel, that's legacy. But there's her influence is being felt all throughout the country because of how much effort, how much focus, and how much commitment she put into helping sustain journalism and keep improving it, not just for herself, but for the craft itself. So, forever grateful for her for that, and I will never question her judgment.
Next is former Sentinel sports writer and opinion columnist, George Diaz.
I guess some of you are wondering, hey, what's the sports guy doing up here? I probably had the same thing, I thought the same thing about myself back in 2006 when Jane approached me about joining the editorial board. I didn't see that coming. I was very comfortable in the sports world, chatting up Shaq and Roberto Duran and Richard Petty, whoever. But now I face the prospect of interviewing and talking to people like former Governor Charlie Crist, Orlando Mayor Buddy Dyer, and then Orlando Police Chief Val Devens. It gave me pause. Should I make this transition? I had some understandable doubts, but Jane didn't. So I accepted the offer. A couple months after that, I wonder if Jane might have changed her mind. I was at an event with Governor Crist, and Jane had won an award. It wasn't the Pulitzer, but it was some prestigious award. And Governor Crist wanted to congratulate her. So I had Jane on the phone with me, and I looked at Governor Crist and I said, "Hey, Charlie, Jane wants to talk to you." Probably not the way to address the governor of the state of Florida. And Jane reminded me that that was not the way to address the governor of the state of Florida. Anyway, we persisted, and it was really one of the best moves of my career. It lasted 29 years. It obviously gave me a much better perspective about the world. It also gave me the opportunity to write op-ed pieces and local columns about issues and topics that were dear to me. It gave me I was allowed to use my voice to write about my mom's struggle with Alzheimer's disease. I called out the left and the right in one column that I happened to find today looking through some stuff. And I was telling both sides, the left and the right, to tone down their political rhetoric. And as you can see, they really took every word that I wrote to heart. Anyway, and on the editorial side, obviously I had to adapt to the one voice because we are a collective, with Jane having the ultimate say in which way we're going to write about things. So one of the things that I was able to do during that time that I'm proud of, I was, with obviously Jane's leadership, we were able to get Greyhound Racing banned in Florida, and I wrote all those editorials, and I obviously didn't see that coming. It also gave me a greater understanding of many aspects of our community, whether it's the arts, politics, social services, and I was also honored to work with some great colleagues like Paul Owens and Mike Griffin. But that's what the thing about Jane. She was obviously a no-nonsense type of boss, but also the consummate leader who built a great team. And I wouldn't be here talking to you if it wasn't for her and what she meant to me as a mentor. She made me a better writer and hopefully a better person in some ways. And when I did find out, ironically, I found out unfortunately through another occasion, a celebration of life for Colby, that Jane was facing a terminal illness. So I texted her, obviously, to wish her condolences. We know it's a difficult situation, we don't quite know what to say. And I thanked her, though, for the opportunity and to join the editorial board. And she goes, George, thank you so much for our relationship on the ed board. I definitely felt fortunate to get you. I would say she's wrong. I was fortunate. Thank you.
James Gunderson, Kevin Clark.
First of all, I want to thank Judy Doyle for her unbelievable. Scott Maxwell told the story a few minutes ago about him sending an email about tourism taxes that he found out later in her inbox a few hours after she passed. The biggest surprise now is she didn't find a way to get back to Scott because she loved those sort of topics. And she still might. She'll find a way. I gave a eulogy at my dad's a couple months ago. And I talked about how when you are close to the parent, that their voices are always rattling around in your head, so you're never without them. And I told the story of my dad's about how I wore a tie, because I could hear my dad saying, "You're wearing a damn tie. You got to put this tie. You got to wear a full suit." And luckily, I know what my mom would say here, which is, don't cheap out on the open bar. And the reason I know that is because she texted Judy and I all the time, don't cheap out on the open bar. And I'm talking about 10 each of that. But when I was thinking about the stories I've told about my mom in the last couple of weeks, the number one thing I keep going back to is some advice she gave me before I started a really, really meaningful job in Chicago Tribune. Answering phones, putting low-level scores in the paper. She said, be the best in the world at it. And I didn't really know what that meant. How are you the best in the world at putting low-level Big Ten softball scores in the Chicago Tribune for an edition that doesn't even circulate within the city limits? It goes to the summer. She said, no, be the best in the world at it. And as I thought about that, I thought it was great professional advice, and I realized it's what she lived by in everything. She was an amazing member of the community. We know that. She loved to see the city grow around her, and she was a huge part of that. We've talked about, obviously, the Performing Arts Center. I think she had a lot to do with the fact that there's a new basketball arena, and the basketball team isn't playing in Louisville or Kansas City or any of that, and she loved those Magic. In fact, the last text she ever sent me was that the Magic should hire Nick Saban type as coach. I don't know what that means, but if you can tell the Magic, then we appreciate it. But as a journalist, she was the best in the world at something. She covered growth in Florida better than any human being on the planet. I told the story of my dad's about how my favorite moment between my parents, we went to a UCF and Texas game to open up the UCF stadium. And my dad was in the front of the president's box, and he was taking in how the university growing around him. And in the back, I didn't tell the story a couple months ago, in the back, my mom, because she knew every important person in the state was there, was going to the different luxury boxes, getting politicians out of the boxes, bringing them to the president's box. I have no idea, the state speaker was there, with like 10 of these politicians sitting at a table in the back of the luxury box. I don't know who they were, what they were talking about. And she walks up to me at the end of the game. They weren't allowed to watch the game. My mom said, we just planned the next 10 years for the state of Florida. And I have no idea what she did or what she talked about, but I'm sure she was correct. But she was also making sure that I was doing the best in the world at every single thing I did. Mayor Dyer is here for a high school newspaper story that I was going to write about the mayor's election. She called the mayor's office and said, my son's going to walk neighborhoods with Mayor Dyer, and he's going to find out everything about this thing. Okay? That's the kind of level of the rigor she wanted me to do. When I wanted to do sports, she called the Magic and said, Kevin needs to be credentialed for Summer League to interview LeBron James. Now, LeBron James played in 2003 here at the Summer League, played in the arena. The day I went there, LeBron James had left to go to a wedding in Ohio. My dad, at the end of the day, when I said LeBron wasn't there, said, your mom's going to call and get LeBron back in town. He didn't invite him. But she was also the best in the world at being a mom, and that's the most important thing. She loved Randall and I a lot, and she also understood what it meant to be a mom. She traveled the world, it's been documented here, but she also knew the best thing in life was to throw something on the grill, on the porch, have 2 Heinekens, and watch college football. The last conversation we ever had was me telling her about the college football games I was going to take Teddy to in the fall. She understood as a Terp, but also a Miami Hurricane via me, and then Notre Dame via the rest of the family. She understood that I wasn't going to take Teddy to the November 7th Miami Notre Dame game because we were expecting that day, but she also wanted to know if there was some wiggle room in that. She was the best in the world at being a champion. She was the best in the world at living in Orlando, and I think everybody here and everybody that she wanted to be here is here and speaking. I mean, it's pretty much 100% attendance here as far as people she wanted to be here. I think it's testament to the power of the life she lived. And I think Judy's going to give a toast here in a minute, but I want to thank you all for coming. She was an amazing woman. She was an amazing part of the city. Thank you so much.
All right. We've come to the end. If you'll all raise your drink, or if you don't have a drink, your arm. In memory of Jane Healy, L'chaim, to life.